Welcome to the WW2 archives, where we unlock the declassified files of World War II and examine the mechanisms of history that reveal patterns in our present. 1968, a Marine corporal, 20 years old, born the year the Korean War ended, crouching in elephant grass 30 kilometers north of Da Nang, examining a rifle pulled from the hands of a dead Viet Cong fighter moments earlier. M1 carbine, American-made, the metal still warm, serial number visible, stamped into the receiver. He photographs it, standard procedure for captured equipment, sends it up through channels, through intelligence networks, through armorers who track such things, who keep meticulous records going back decades. The rifle was manufactured in 1944 at the Inland Division Plant in Dayton, Ohio. Issued to the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency, what we call the CIA today, in July 1945. Recorded in supply manifests as transferred to Indigenous Resistance Forces, Indochina Theater, in August of that year. 23 years in the jungle, 23 years of moisture and heat and combat. And in 1968, it had just been used to kill an American soldier. The corporal, filling out the paperwork, writing the serial number in his report, had no way of knowing the full story. Had no way of knowing that an American intelligence officer had personally carried that rifle through the jungle in 1945, had handed it to a dying man in a cave, had taught Vietnamese fighters how to field strip it, how to aim it, how to kill with it. Had no way of knowing the dying man's name was Ho Chi Minh. Had no way of knowing that American medics saved his life with quinine and sulfa drugs, that American instructors trained his guerrillas in ambush tactics and sabotage techniques, that American officers stood beside him when he declared independence by quoting Thomas Jefferson. Had no way of knowing that everything killing Americans in 1968, the tactics, the training, the weapons, the doctrine, had been given, deliberately, enthusiastically, by Americans in 1945 to fight a different enemy in a different war. By the time Vietnam ended, 58,220 Americans were dead, many killed by tactics we taught, many killed by weapons we provided. Many killed by an enemy we created through decisions that seemed rational at the time, that made perfect tactical sense, that succeeded brilliantly in their immediate objective of killing Japanese soldiers, and that planted seeds for a war that would consume a generation. This is the story of OSS Deer Team, 7 Americans who parachuted into Japanese-occupied territory in July 1945, who found a communist resistance leader dying of malaria in a mountain cave, who saved his life and armed his fighters and trained them in American guerrilla warfare tactics, who succeeded perfectly in their mission, and who, without knowing it, without intending it, created America's most determined enemy. This is the story of intelligence officers who warned, precisely and repeatedly, what would happen if America betrayed its wartime ally. This is the story of warnings ignored, of field reports filed and forgotten, of tactical success that became strategic catastrophe. This is how we armed our own enemy, and this is why the pattern keeps repeating. The cave, July 16, 1945, 7 men falling through darkness over Japanese-occupied Indochina. Major Archimedes Patti, 32 years old, team leader, multilingual intelligence officer who spoke French and had studied Indochina's colonial history. Stepping out of a C-47 transport aircraft at 200 hours into blackness, into uncertainty, into a mission deep behind enemy lines with no extraction plan, no backup. No certainty the resistance fighters they were supposed to contact even existed. The parachute deployed, the jungle canopy rushed up. The impact was hard, harder than training, and 1 man broke his ankle immediately, and the equipment containers scattered across half a mile of dense vegetation, and as dawn broke over the mountains of Tonkin. Deer Team 7 American OSS agents armed with carbines and Thompson submachine guns and hope had no idea where the Viet Minh were, whether Japanese patrols had heard the aircraft, whether this mission would last days or hours, or whether it would end with bullets in a ditch before the sun was fully up. Viet Minh scouts found them within 6 hours, emerged from the jungle, thin men, poorly armed, wearing mix of peasant clothing and scavenged military gear, carrying ancient rifles and primitive weapons. Through interpreters, through broken French and hand gestures and growing trust, they explained, their leader was gravely ill, was dying, was essential to everything the resistance had built. Could the Americans help? Patti and his medic, Paul Hoagland, were led on a 2-day trek deeper into the mountains, through villages where Japanese occupation had created starvation, where children had the hollow eyes and distended bellies of severe malnutrition. Hoagland wrote in his field diary, preserved now in the National Archives, available to researchers, a primary source document that he had never seen anything like it outside of photographs from Nazi concentration camps. July 18, 1945, they reached the cave. Inside, lying on a bamboo mat, barely conscious, skin burning with fever, a man in his 50s drifted in and out of delirium. Viet Minh fighters surrounded him, desperate, explaining through interpreters that this man was everything to their movement, that if he died their resistance might collapse. Hoagland examined the patient. Malaria, certainly. Amoebic dysentery, probably. Severe dehydration, malnutrition. Without treatment, maybe 48 hours left, maybe less. The OSS team had brought medical supplies for their own use. Quinine for malaria. Sulfa drugs for infection. Electrolyte solutions for dehydration. Hoagland, 26 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania, trained as a medic but never having treated anything like this, made a decision that would echo through the next 30 years. He saved the man's life. For 5 days the American medic administered treatment, monitored vitals, adjusted dosages. Slowly, impossibly, the fever broke. The patient regained consciousness. The delirium cleared. And when he finally had strength to sit up and speak, he did so in perfect English. Unaccented, educated, startlingly precise for a man who had been dying in a cave 3 days earlier. "I must thank you," he said to Patti, his voice weak but clear. "You have given me my life back. I am Nguyen Ai Quoc, but you may call me Ho Chi Minh." The conversations that followed, as Ho's strength returned over the next week, revealed something Patti had not expected. This man quoted the American Declaration of Independence from memory, discussed Franklin Roosevelt's leadership with insight and nuance, spoke knowledgeably about American history and American ideals, about Lincoln and Jefferson, and the principles of 1776. He explained his vision: not communist revolution, not ideological warfare, but independence. Vietnam had been colonized by France for 80 years, occupied by Japan since 1940. The Vietnamese people wanted what Americans had won in their revolution: freedom from foreign control. If America helped Vietnam achieve independence after Japan fell, Ho promised, looking directly at Patti with absolute sincerity, Vietnam would be America's ally in Asia. Patti, in his memoir published decades later, wrote that he believed him, wrote it in his field reports, sent back to OSS headquarters through radio channels. Subject is highly intelligent, politically sophisticated, appears genuinely pro-American. His quarrel is with French colonialism, not with the West. Assessment: nationalist first, communist second. Recommends supporting Vietnamese independence as strategic priority. But first, there was a war to fight. By early August, Ho had recovered enough to walk, to lead, to plan military operations. Deer Team began their actual mission: assess the Viet Minh's capabilities and, if warranted, arm and train them to fight Japan. What they found was roughly 10,000 fighters scattered across northern Vietnam, poorly equipped with World War I-era rifles and homemade weapons, virtually untrained in modern warfare tactics, but motivated, with extensive local support, with detailed intelligence on Japanese positions and movements. The strategic calculation was brutally simple. With American weapons and American training, the Viet Minh could tie down Japanese divisions, could disrupt supply lines, could kill Japanese soldiers, could save American lives in what everyone believed would be the coming invasion of Japan. The decision was made: arm them, train them, use them. The manifests still exist in declassified files, metal canisters hitting the jungle floor from C-47 cargo drops. Inside, 200 M1 carbines, the same rifle American infantry carried, each one recorded with serial number and transfer date. 50 Thompson submachine guns, 1260 mortars, 5,000 rounds of ammunition. Grenades, medical supplies, radio equipment, enough to transform rice farmers into an army, enough to kill a lot of Japanese soldiers. 20 years later, enough to kill a lot of Americans. But more dangerous than the weapons was the knowledge. OSS operatives spent August 1945 teaching Viet Minh fighters American infantry tactics, how to conduct ambushes, how to select kill zones, how to coordinate fields of fire, how to execute hit-and-run raids without sustaining casualties, how to sabotage supply lines, how to cut communication wires, how to place explosives for maximum psychological effect, how to gather intelligence, how to identify valuable targets, how to use terrain for advantage. The metallic click of M1 carbine bolts being cycled over and over and over as Vietnamese fighters learned the mechanics of American weapons, that sound echoing through training camps in the mountains, that sound that would echo again in different jungles 20 years later. One OSS operative, whose name is redacted in the declassified documents but whose words survived in the files, wrote in a memo dated August 8, 1945, "We're training these people very well indeed. I hope we don't regret it someday." August 11, 1945, a Japanese supply convoy, 18 trucks carrying ammunition and rice to garrisons in the northern highlands, wound through a mountain pass 60 kilometers west of Hanoi. The road was narrow, hemmed in by dense jungle on both sides, a perfect kill zone. Viet Minh fighters, 23 of them, armed with the M1 carbines OSS Deer Team, had airdropped 1 week earlier, positioned themselves in the vegetation above the road, exactly as the American instructors had taught them. Waited for the convoy to enter the zone. The lead truck rounded the bend. The Viet Minh commander, who 2 weeks earlier had never held an American weapon, who had been personally trained by an OSS instructor in a mountain camp, raised his hand, held it, then dropped it. 23 M1 carbines opened fire simultaneously. The lead truck's driver slumped. The vehicle careened into a ditch. The convoy bunched up, exactly as the OSS tactical manual predicted. Viet Minh fighters poured fire into the trucks, methodical, controlled, professional. 90 seconds later, the firing stopped. 18 trucks destroyed or disabled. 47 Japanese soldiers dead. 0 Viet Minh casualties. The fighters melted back into the jungle, exactly as trained, leaving no trace except bodies and burning vehicles. The after-action report filed to OSS headquarters noted, "Indigenous forces demonstrating exceptional tactical proficiency, partnership exceeding expectations, recommend continued support." Between August 11 and August 15, Viet Minh units armed and trained by Deer Team cut Japanese communication lines in 23 locations, destroyed 5 ammunition depots, ambushed 9 supply columns, killed an estimated 214 Japanese soldiers. OSS intelligence assessments suggested these operations tied down at least 2 Japanese divisions that could otherwise have been redeployed to defend the home islands. The weapons worked, the tactics worked, the alliance worked. And on August 12, when a B-29 bomber was shot down over northern Vietnam and 11 American airmen bilayed out into Japanese-occupied territory, it was Viet Minh fighters carrying the M1 carbines we had given them, who reached the crew first, who hid them from Japanese search parties, who protected them for 3 days, who escorted them safely back to American lines. Ho Chi Minh personally coordinated the rescue operation. When the rescued airmen reported to OSS debriefing in China, they described how Vietnamese guerrillas had risked their lives to save Americans from Japanese captivity. The partnership by every tactical measure was succeeding brilliantly. August 15, 1945, the radio crackled with news that changed everything. Japan had surrendered. World War II was over. The OSS mission had succeeded perfectly. Deer Team had armed an effective resistance force. The Viet Minh had killed Japanese soldiers, had disrupted enemy operations, had saved American lives. And that's precisely when everything began to unravel. The warnings nobody read. September 2, 1945, Hanoi. 500,000 Vietnamese filling Ba Dinh Square under a blazing sun, and on a hastily constructed wooden platform, Ho Chi Minh, still thin, still recovering from the illness that nearly killed him, stepping to the microphone with Major Archimedes Patti and other OSS officers standing beside him in their uniforms, American flags visible in the background. The moment captured in photographs now preserved in the National Archives, and Ho beginning his Declaration of Independence with words every American schoolchild knows. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The crowd erupted, but Ho wasn't finished. This immortal statement was made in the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America in 1776. In a broader sense, this means, all the peoples on the earth are equal from birth. All the peoples have a right to live, to be happy and free. Patti, standing on that platform, watching tears stream down Vietnamese faces, understood he was witnessing history, the birth of a nation, an ally choosing American founding principles as its model, a moment when the future could have been different. What Patti didn't know, couldn't have known standing there in the August heat, was that the moment was already lost. 4 months earlier, April 12, 1945, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had died of a cerebral hemorrhage at Warm Springs, Georgia. 12 years as president, architect of the New Deal, architect of Allied victory, architect of visions for the post-war world that he had kept largely in his head, in conversations with advisors, in relationships built over more than a decade. Roosevelt believed European colonialism was finished, morally indefensible and strategically counterproductive for America's post-war interests. Had specifically discussed Indochina, telling advisors that France should not be allowed to reclaim its colonial possessions, that an international trusteeship leading to independence was the right path. But Roosevelt never formalized this vision in written policy directives. It existed in conversations, in shared understanding among his closest advisors, in institutional knowledge that lived in people's heads rather than in documents. When Roosevelt died, that knowledge died with him. Harry Truman, vice president for only 82 days, suddenly thrust into the presidency, had been excluded from Roosevelt's strategic planning, had never been briefed on Indochina policy, didn't know the vision existed. And Truman's State Department, focused on rebuilding Europe, on containing Soviet expansion, on managing the emerging Cold War, made a different calculation entirely. France was crucial to American strategic interests in Europe. France wanted its colonies back. Supporting Vietnamese independence would alienate a vital European ally. The arithmetic was simple. The decision was made. Support France's return to Indochina. Major Patti saw the disaster coming with perfect clarity. In his after-action reports, preserved now in declassified CIA historical archives, he wrote warning after warning, prediction after prediction, each one precise, each one accurate, each one ignored. Subject Ho Chi Minh commands genuine popular support. Any attempt by France to reassert colonial control will be met with armed resistance. The Viet Minh are prepared to fight. We have trained them well. Strategic recommendation: the United States should support Vietnamese independence. The alternative supporting French recolonization will result in prolonged guerrilla war that France cannot win. We will then face choice between abandoning France to defeat or becoming involved ourselves in an unwinnable colonial conflict. Ho Chi Minh is nationalist first, communist second. If America rejects him, he will turn to Soviet Union and China by necessity, not preference. We have narrow window to secure Vietnam as American ally. That window is closing. The reports were filed, catalogued, stored, ignored. Ho Chi Minh sent 8 letters to President Truman between September 1945 and February 1946. Each quoted the American Declaration of Independence. Each appealed to America's anti-colonial heritage, to the principles of 1776, to Roosevelt's Atlantic Charter. Each asked for diplomatic recognition, for support against French colonial restoration, for the alliance he believed he had earned by fighting Japan beside American soldiers. None received a response, not one. November 23, 1946, French naval forces bombarded the port city of Haiphong with heavy artillery. Estimated 6,000 Vietnamese civilians killed in a single afternoon. The message was clear. The First Indochina War had begun. The Viet Minh, armed with American weapons, trained in American tactics, began fighting French colonial forces using everything OSS Deer Team had taught them. The guerrilla warfare manual from 1945, the ambush techniques, the hit-and-run raids, the sabotage methods, the intelligence gathering, all of it applied with devastating effectiveness against French forces. For 8 years, from 1946 to 1954, America funded France's colonial war. over $2 billion American dollars supporting French operations against resistance fighters America had armed and trained. The strategic irony was complete, was absurd, and Archimedes Patti, watching from retirement, wrote letter after letter to anyone who would listen, explaining that he had predicted exactly this, that his reports from 1945 had warned precisely what would happen, that every casualty was preventable, that every death was the consequence of ignoring field intelligence. Nobody listened. May 7, 1954. Dien Bien Phu. French forces, surrounded in a remote valley, were overrun after a 57-day siege. The tactics the Viet Minh used, infiltration, encirclement, artillery coordination, sustained assault, bore the unmistakable hallmarks of training they had received from American advisors 9 years earlier. France withdrew from Vietnam. The Geneva Accords temporarily divided the country, and America, having refused to support Vietnamese independence in 1945, having funded France's failed colonial war for 8 years, made the decision that would define a generation. We would take France's place. We would fight the Viet Minh ourselves. Everything Patti had predicted was coming true. Everything he had warned about in reports that sat in filing cabinets, unread, gathering dust while the decisions were made that would send 58,000 Americans to their deaths. The weapons come home. 1965, American combat forces deploying to South Vietnam in division strength. Young men, many born after World War II ended, many too young to remember Korea, sent to fight an enemy their government insisted was communist aggression from the north, was Chinese expansion, was Soviet imperialism, was anything except what it actually was. Nationalist resistance that America had armed and trained and then betrayed. The weapons came home first. When American forces began capturing equipment from Viet Cong and North Vietnamese units, military intelligence analysts traced serial numbers, tracked provenance, discovered M1 carbines from OSS supply drops in 1945. 20-year-old rifles, meticulously maintained, still functional, still deadly. Thompson submachine guns with OSS inventory codes, mortars from American stockpiles transferred in August 1945. The weapons we had given them to kill Japanese, maintained through 2 decades of warfare, now killing Americans. But the weapons were not the worst of it. The tactics were worse. The guerrilla warfare training OSS Deer Team had conducted in August 1945 the ambush site selection, the kill zone geometry, the fire coordination, the escape routes, the booby trap placement, the supply line interdiction, the intelligence networks, had become institutionalized in Viet Minh military doctrine. Officers who had been personally trained by American instructors in 1945 were commanding divisions against American forces in 1965. The tactics that had killed Japanese soldiers in 1945 were killing American soldiers in 1968, and they worked perfectly because they were American tactics, were proven tactics, were tactics refined through 20 years of continuous warfare. A Marine Corps after-action report from 1967, declassified decades later, described an ambush in Quang Tri Province that killed 14 Americans in 90 seconds. The tactical analysis noted that the ambush site selection, the fields of fire, the coordination, the timing, everything followed the exact pattern taught in the OSS Simple Sabotage Field Manual, the same manual Deer Team had used for training in 1945, the same manual that was supposed to help Vietnamese kill Japanese, now helping Vietnamese kill Americans. A veteran interviewed years later for the PBS documentary, Vietnam. A Television History described finding enemy supply caches containing American weapons, studying their tactics and recognizing patterns from U.S. Army field manuals, feeling like they were fighting a mirror image of themselves, a version of the American military that knew all the same tricks, all the same methods, because they had learned from the same teachers. Later I found out why, he said, staring at the camera with thousand-yard stare still visible decades after the war. We taught them everything. By 1975, when Saigon fell, when the last helicopters lifted off the embassy roof, when the war finally ended, 58,220 Americans were dead. Hundreds of thousands wounded, a generation traumatized, a nation divided, many of those Americans killed by tactics we had taught, many killed by weapons we had provided, all of it preventable. All of it predicted in reports written in 1945 by an intelligence officer who had been there, who had seen it coming, who had warned anyone who would listen. The reports were there all along, in filing cabinets, in archives, perfect intelligence, perfect warnings, perfectly ignored while the decisions were made, while the commitments were undertaken, while the troops were deployed, while the war escalated, while 58,000 Americans died for a strategic mistake made in 1945. We began with a rifle, M1 carbine, serial number from 1944, handed to Ho Chi Minh's fighters in August 1945 to kill Japanese soldiers. Recovered from a dead Viet Cong fighter in 1968 after it had killed an American. The story of that rifle is the story of a choice. In July 1945, OSS Deer Team parachuted into Japanese-occupied Indochina on a mission that succeeded perfectly by every tactical measure. Found an ally fighting Japan, saved his life, armed his forces, trained his fighters, used them effectively, B-29 crews rescued, Japanese convoys ambushed, communication lines cut, the partnership worked. Japan was defeated, but in September 1945, in the decisions that followed Japan's surrender, tactical success became strategic catastrophe. When Franklin Roosevelt died in April 1945, his vision for Vietnamese independence died with him. When the OSS was dissolved in 1946, institutional knowledge about Indochina scattered and was lost. When Archimedes Patti's warnings were filed and forgotten, when Ho Chi Minh's letters to Truman went unanswered, when America chose to support French colonialism over Vietnamese independence, the path to war became inevitable. The photographs from September 2, 1945, still exist in the National Archives. American OSS officers standing on a platform in Hanoi as Ho Chi Minh declared independence by quoting the Declaration of Independence. Those photographs represent a fork in the road, a moment when alliance was possible, when trust existed, when different future was available. We chose the other path, 20 years of war, 58,000 American dead. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese dead, and the pattern didn't end with Vietnam. In the 1980s, CIA armed Afghan Mujahideen against Soviet occupation. Mission succeeded. Soviets withdrew. But the weapons, the training, the tactics ended up with the Taliban. When American forces invaded Afghanistan in 2001, they faced enemies using American weapons, learned from American instructors. In Iraq, American forces armed Shia militias, who later aligned with Iran. In Syria, American weapons reached extremist groups. The pattern repeats because institutions don't learn, don't preserve knowledge, don't connect tactical decisions to strategic consequences. Major Patti spent his final years trying to preserve the lessons, giving interviews, writing his memoir, explaining to anyone who would listen that everything that happened in Vietnam. He had predicted in his reports in 1945 that every casualty was preventable, that the intelligence was perfect, that what failed was not the mission, but the system's ability to listen to its own field officers. The weapons America gave to fight Japan in 1945 killed Americans in 1965, not because the OSS mission failed, it succeeded perfectly, but because warnings from the field were dismissed by authority in the capital, because institutional knowledge was lost in leadership transitions, because short-term alliances were managed without planning for long-term consequences. This has been the WW2 archives. The mission was declassified, the warnings were documented, the pattern is visible. The question is whether we're listening now, whether we've learned anything at all, or whether the next generation will stand in another cemetery, counting another 58,000 names, wondering why nobody read the reports from the people who were there, who saw it coming, who warned us while there was still time to choose a different path. The choice is always available. We just have to listen to the warnings before the weapons come home.